Hi, everyone. My name is Mrs. Wade. I'm the community schools therapist at Carmody Hills, and I have with me Dr. Reed and Ms. Washington. If you both could take a moment to let us know what it is that you do here at Carmody Hills. And can we start with you, Ms. Washington?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am Mrs. Washington. I've been at Carmody Hills for 3 years. I am a third grade classroom teacher. I'm a third grade level chair. I am also the restorative justice coach for Carmody Hills and the PBIS coordinator.
And you, Dr. Reed?
Yes, hi, my name is Dr. Reed, and I am the school psychologist at Carmody Hills. This is my second year at Carmody Hills and in PG County. As a school psychologist, I mostly focus on evaluating students who have academic or behavioral concerns to see if they need special education services. But I'm also very interested in, when I do have the opportunity to be engaged in punitive practices like restorative practices and alternatives to suspension.
Great. So we're here today to talk a little bit about restorative practices. Ms. Washington, can you tell us what restorative practices are?
Restorative practices, it is about building relationships. That is the crust of it, is building relationships, restoring relationships. I think it's easier for me to tell you what it's not. A lot of times people are under the misconception of what restorative justice is. They sometimes feel like it's an opportunity for people to get over, but it is really an opportunity for people to be restored even on their worst day. And so it's about relationship building.
Now, one of the terms you mentioned is restorative justice. So I know that they're closely related, restorative practices and restorative justice. And Dr. Reed, you've done some work with restorative justice. Can you tell us a little bit more about restorative justice and how the two tie in together?
Yeah, so the way I like to think about it is restorative practices are prevention approaches. So just like Ms. Washington said, those are our relationships, and it's not really a thing you do, it's a way you are. So it's not really, you can't do restorative practices, you are operating from a restorative practices approach and mindset. Restorative justice, the way I like to think about that, is where we're intervening. So we have the foundation of our approach being these relationships are strong within our schools, and restorative justice is used when we have behaviors that occur that harm someone. It can harm a student, harm a faculty member, and the restorative justice is how we resolve that harm. So it's basically, it's often thought of as an alternative to suspension. So rather than, or not even suspension, an alternative to punitive practices. So rather than, let's say, suspending a student or sending them to the office, we are going to repair the harm that was caused and bring them back into the community, back into the safe space of our restorative practices. That makes sense.
It does. And that brings me to another topic that I'm passionate about, which is the school to prison pipeline. And Dr. Reed, I wonder if you could share a little bit about that, about what the school to prison pipeline is and how restorative justice and restorative practices try to break that pipeline.
Yeah, and I'm super passionate about the school to prison pipeline as well. I think the simplest way I can frame it is that the school to prison pipeline is basically a pipeline of practices that occur within schools that can ultimately lead to students becoming involved in the juvenile justice system. And this happens, it can start as early as preschool. The second, the research says the second we suspend or expel a student, they're, I don't know the numbers, X times more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system later on in life. That's for a number of reasons. So there are direct pathways, right? When you're in high school, police presence in schools, when misbehaviors are happening, if that is our approach, is to involve the police, so we often get students going directly from the school to the prison system in some way, shape, or form. It can also happen indirectly. And like I said, when you're suspending students, they're not in the school environments. We're already kind of not setting them up for success. They're missing instruction, they're missing time with their peers, they're missing opportunities to develop positive relationships. They're ultimately not developing a positive connection to school, to education. And so they check out. But that checkout can lead to, we'll see misbehaviors happening at school, because when we suspend a student, we're not getting at the root cause, we're just suspending them and then bringing them back into the school. So we are more likely to still see those behaviors happening heightened because they're feeling alienated, they're feeling, and then we see drops in grades, we see increases in behaviors where their students are more likely to drop out of school. There are all of these things that are connected to the act of suspending a student. And those actions are connected to potentially being involved in the juvenile justice system. So it's really important for us to have alternatives to suspension in place and restorative practices in place that can prevent this from spiraling for students.
One thing I just wanted to add to that part of the prison to pipeline, because there's an academic component that plays a big part. And so studies have shown students who are not on grade level reading by third grade, that they feed into the prison to pipeline mechanism. And I think that comes from kindergarten to second grade, students are in school learning to read. And when they get to third grade, then their curriculum is read to learn. And so children who are not on grade level and able to decode and to read, they tend to struggle academically. And so when you're struggling academically and you think about the age of the children and they recognize that they're not on level, the next thing that happens is the behavior. That's where you start seeing, because kids have their self-worth and their self-pride. And when that is threatened, that self-image, that's where you start seeing the behavior issue. Now, with restorative justice, we're not saying that you may get suspended. There may be consequences. There are always going to be consequences. But at the end of the day, you still have a right to be restored. So whatever your consequence is, when you come back into that space should return back to a safe space. And we want kids to understand that one moment in time does not define your entire day, and it doesn't define your entire being of who you are.
Thank you for that, Ms. Washington. I was going to ask you, being a third grade teacher, I have heard, I don't know how true this is, but I have heard that the amount of prisons that are built some of that is determined by the test scores of third graders. And I think it's interesting that you are a third grade teacher and then you are in charge of the restorative justice and restorative practices here at Carmody Hills. Did any of you, either one of you, want to comment on that?
I've heard the same thing, but I think as an educator and as a mom, I'm not going to put a label and I'm not going to put a stop sign up at any grade level, because children, just like adults, are always changing. I don't look at who they are today. I'm setting seeds of who they're going to become. And so if you come into a space and there's no limitation on your expectation, then that is removed. I don't care what is written or what research says. We know the power of positive thinking and the power of prayer has the potential to change a space, and it normally does. So building their self-esteem, doing the work is going to produce a different outcome.
Well said. My next question is very closely related. Dr. Reed, you mentioned that suspension is one of the punitive practices that we see in schools. I'm wondering if there are any other practices that you all have seen during your time working in PGCPS, or even, when you were coming up in school, that are not restorative, and what that can do to the mental health of students and their family members. Dr. Reed, would you like to answer or start?
Yeah, I can start. I think about punitive practices a lot more broadly than just suspensions, kind of like you just mentioned. The way I think about it are punitive practices are any practice that ultimately lead to a student not feeling welcomed in a school. And so kind of an example, I guess, a lot of times our only, I guess, method of dealing with behavior is to, let's say, kick a student out of the classroom, just apply some type of punishment. So we don't allow them to go to recess. We're basically limiting opportunities for them to form a positive relationship with school. And if that is our approach, those are the punitive practices. I'm trying to think of another example. Mrs. Washington can probably think of some more readily that happen within the classroom, because I know that there are ways within the classroom to have punitive practices and also ways to have more positive responses to behaviors in the classroom.
I think it's every educator's job or every adult in a space to create a welcoming space. One of the things I do tell my students that this is our home. I'm the mom and you're the students. These are your brothers and sisters. So creating a family atmosphere. And so when you think about human nature, everybody wants to feel love. But what people don't want to feel, and I think where you have to watch, you shaming someone in front of their peers, calling them out or belittling, those things to me are punitive because they deal with the emotions of a young person. And so for every negative thing, you have to say 12 positive things to fill their cup up. And so most people are not going around saying, well, I said something negative to little Johnny. Now let me think of 12 things to say before he or she goes home. And so we want to be careful. We want to use our words to build, strengthen, and encourage. And just understanding the power of the words that we use in a space, because I believe you can still discipline a child and love them up, because they have to recognize that their behavior will come with consequences. Because here's what we see. I think sometimes when we lower the expectation, we set a tone that there is no consequences. When they get out into the real world or outside of the school walls, we're in our school, they are our little darlings, they're our sweetie pies. But in the real world, you are another young person or another older person doing something that is against the law, and there will be consequences for them. So we want to start teaching them early on that they are loved, but true love is loving you enough that when you're wrong, that you will be corrected. But that doesn't mean that someone don't love you. And so I think getting children to understand part of loving you is correcting you, because I think so many times our children grow up and where there's no consequences, they feel like that's love. But when you get out in the world, that's not how it's going to be. And teaching them also, I think, Dr. Reed, you mentioned about police in school. They have to understand the police is not their enemy. And so I think changing that stigma about who your community and the community workers in that community, who they are and what they are there to enforce law. But you have to show them the better part. I think sometimes we take some of the things in the media and we use it to destroy the image of the very people who are put in place to help our students.
That's a fair point. Can I comment real quick? Sorry. I like one thing that you mentioned, Mrs. Washington, which I think is getting at the idea of natural consequences. And that's a big part of restorative justice, right? So we have a classic example is like a student graffitis a wall and they now have to clean that wall up. That is a natural consequence. So it's not a punitive consequence, but it is a natural. They understand that was wrong. This is how I fix or repair that harm. And now I'm entered back into the community with love and grace because I have acknowledged my wrongdoing and fixed the wrongdoing, and now it's a clean slate.
And not to bring it up again. If the child gets, well, I remember, or you always stay away from those words. You always do this, or the last time you do. And I think the add-on to that is if you have a child that is constantly, let's say I'm using that example, graffiti, I might bring in a canvas board and say, can you do me a favor? I was looking for some new art for my classroom. Can you create, Mrs. Washington, something that's beautiful? Put a switch on it.
Cultivate those strengths. We have to view everything as a sign of strength.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So turning it all around, restoring them, bringing peace and order back to the space by getting rid of the graffiti on the wall, but letting them use their gifts and talents in a way that is productive and helpful to the community. Awesome. You also, Ms. Washington, hit on another point that I was going to ask you about where, or both of you did, where's the balance, in order to have a safe space, in order to have the community that we want in schools and out in the world, there has to be some type of structure. There has to be, kids have to learn some type of social responsibility. How do we maintain that balance? And I mean, you've touched on it really, but is there anything else that you want to add about different practices that can be done in the school, and even maybe parents can do at home, so that the children recognize that there are consequences for behavior, but they don't feel isolated or that they are a bad person? I know, like you were saying, the positive words, the power of your words. Sometimes we say, you know, oh, you're bad, or Johnny is bad. And it's like, no, Johnny may have did something that disrupt the community, but that doesn't make him a bad person. It's the behavior.
I think the balance for me is establishing that I think a lot of times we identify our students by the good that they do. Your grades. So kids believe that they're their grades, and that's a lot of stress, or the good deeds that you do. But loving someone is not really about the good or the bad that you do. I love you because you exist. I love you because I see you in front of me. I love you because I recognize that you're not perfect and neither am I. And I think letting children know that you're not perfect and teaching them that when you mess up, you fess up, so that they understand that this is a natural part of life. I mess up, you mess up, but getting them to own it is the key. I messed up. This is my consequence. What are some strategies I can use? I'll give you an example. I had a student that used to love to cuss and could cuss in the right sense. So what I did is I gave them a word book, and I gave them new words to replace, because ultimately what you're doing is trying to communicate something, but you're using the words that you are used to hearing in your space to give me the intensity of what you're feeling. So what I did is turn it into an English lesson. Let me give you some other words that you can use, and it will let me know what you're feeling. And so providing options, but at the same time, there were consequences for that language. So they understood that the language was wrong. They understood that the language is unacceptable. They got their consequences, and we move on. Once they mess up, they fess up, they get their consequence, we move on, and it is never brought up again. And then we give them alternatives. And I think that's the key, is having an alternative way to do something.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head and hit all of the points that I was going to make. I think ultimately what I'm hearing you say, and kind of the way I view it, is that everything needs to be rooted in love and respect. So it's all about the foundation that you set before a behavior happens. So, you know, it's going to be impossible for you to build up a student's self-worth if you already don't have a positive relationship with them, and now you're punishing them, or now you're holding them to this expectation that they didn't even know was your expectation. So communicating your expectations, having that but also respect. I respect you as a child, you respect me as an adult, and we navigate that relationship based on, you know, kind of all of the things that Mrs. Washington just said.
And Dr. Reed, you said something that's so key. I think a lot of times when we read books or the Bible about how we should treat people, we often think that's talking adult to adult, and not recognizing that the standard is for everyone, whether it's a child or an adult. We're to love them the same. And so kindness goes across. And I think sometimes it becomes a battle between adults and children, but I think the problem is that adults don't recognize that the same respect you give to an adult should be given to a child. I just want to share one quick example. There was a student in PG County that attended Bowie High School and got caught bringing a gun because being bullied. And in their mind, they thought bringing the gun would signify, I'm cool, leave me alone. And so one of the things the person said to me, because someone did tell that they had a gun, and of course they went through the proper procedure, the police came, he was arrested, taken down, booked. But one of the things that the child shared when I was talking to them, they said, the police was so nice to me. Now, most of us are like, oh my gosh, you're going to jail. But they came away with, the police officer was so nice to me. Now, did that change the fact that you were going to be booked and that you were put in a cell? No. But when they came out and they were released to their parent, that was the thing that they remembered most about probably the most horrible day of their life, is that the police officer was so nice to them.
It's probably something he didn't expect.
He didn't expect, and the expectation of what we say about our community or the people in our community. But that goes to show people can handle their consequence, but it also goes to show that you can give it in a way that's not demeaning.
Yeah. And I think that's the key part of restorative justice, is that in order for there to be some resolution to the problem, your approach needs to reflect that. You know, you can't give harsh words, harsh language, and expect to see a change in behavior. So I love that example. Thanks, Mrs. Washington.
I just said to a colleague yesterday, actually, that we can't teach children to be respectful by disrespecting them. We have to model. And one of the things you were saying, Ms. Washington, I hear you saying, is that, you know, there's a power struggle sometimes between adults and children. And children often don't feel like they are respected. And so when we're trying to get them to do what we believe is what's best for them, but we aren't exhibiting that same type of behavior, it's not going to be easy.
Yep. Because they're going to emulate what they see. Think about it as moms. If you have children, you know, you can say one thing, but if you do something else, you're going to see that same behavior produced in your child. And we have to get away from saying, I'm doing it because I'm grown. The question then becomes, is it acceptable no matter what your age is?
Yeah, it's like that old saying, people would say to their kids, do as I say, not as I do. But we know that kids learn by doing what they see.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Ms. Washington, what are some of the practices that are being instituted specifically here at Carmody Hills? Like, are you doing restorative circles? And if so, can you explain what restorative circles are?
Okay, so yes, we do offer restorative circle, and not just for the kids, but for adults. And so the goal is to bring people together so that they can express how something made them feel. A lot of times what we find out is that person did not even recognize that they offended someone. Because if I've been talking a certain way all my life, and then I say something to you that's a trigger, it wasn't that I was trying to hurt your feelings. I didn't recognize it. And so bringing them back and restoring the relationship, one of the things that I spend a lot of time is working with students, meeting with them whole class, discussing issues that are relevant in their space. And how do we move forward? How do we build community? How do we take ownership? How do we see ourselves? Because that's more of a concern for me, is how does an individual see themselves as opposed to what the world says about you? How do you see yourself, and how do I cause you to fall in love with who you are? And even with all of your imperfections, how do I get you to fall in love with you and then move forward to become the best that you can be? And so spend a lot of time with talking about students, trying to see the bigger picture, the why of some things, the why of the behavior. Because until I can deal with your why, I'm just putting a temporary bandage on what you're doing at that time. And so teaching them that I see you, I really see you, and I'm okay with all of you, the good, the bad, and the not so good. So loving them even when they're unlovable. And for me, I know that's how God sees me. He loves me on my best days. He loves me on my worst days. And he loves me on those days when I don't acknowledge who I am in him. And that's the same type of love I feel like we are required to give students.
So how can a teacher, student, or parent request to have a restorative circle?
They can simply shoot me an email at michelle.washington@pgcps.org. They can come in and leave a note and with a phone number, because if it's important to them, it's important to me. There is a bucket in my classroom for students. So as I go into the classrooms to talk with them, I also let them know there's a bucket in my room. It says Prayer Works. I'm unashamed of who I am and what practices I'm going to use to restore people. And they can write on a sticky note what is going on and put it in that bucket. If they want me to pull them to have a conversation, I will. If they just want to get their thoughts out, they have that option. I leave the space open for them to say, yes, I want to spend time and talk with you, or no, I just needed to say this.
Well, thank you for that. That's good to know. Now, I'm wondering if there are any changes. It sounds like a lot of work is being done so far to make Carmody Hills a place where restoration is practiced. Are there any other changes that either of you would like to see implemented here in Carmody Hills, or even in PGCPS altogether?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. I wish I could stand on the porch of the White House or the county office to say that restorative coaches need to be full-time. We can't, what I hear so often is the problem, but we know what the solution is and we're not doing it. We recognize that we've been in a pandemic for almost 3 years and that we are at an all-time high with mental health issues, whether it's a child or an adult. But then the people that we are training do not become full-time workers in our county to provide the support that we need to pull our students out of this pit. So for myself, I'm a classroom teacher. I'm a self-contained teacher. I teach 6 subjects. And so when I see students or I'm dealing with an adult who's in crisis, it's on my break or it's trying to reach them in between my lunch, but there's work to be done. And if we don't recognize, pay now or pay later is my philosophy. Make the sacrifice now, because these children, they are the now generation. They're not the generation to come. They're the now generation. This is the generation that will make laws and bills for all of us. And if we do not invest in them at this point, we're setting everyone up for failure. So we need to get our voices out there and make ourselves heard and fight for our children.
Yes, kind of related to that. I mean, I said in the beginning that, my role in PG has been predominantly completing special education evaluations. And I have 3 schools, so I'm only at Carmody Hills 1 day a week. I have 2 other schools that I split my time between. We need more school psychologists. We need more school counselors. We need more mental health practitioners. We need people that are focusing on restorative practices full time. We need a full time. If I was able to be in the school, Carmody Hills full time, I could dedicate my time to evaluations and also provide mental health services. But because I'm stretched so thin, I'm unable to be involved in the restorative practices. These awesome things that Mrs. Washington is doing, I would be able to help out if I didn't have a million other things going on. So I think it's always a conversation about, what we're valuing, what we're, not necessarily what we're valuing, but what those above us are valuing, where the money is going, and, where we can better put our efforts to make sure that we're, implementing proactive practices. We don't want to be reactive. We're so reactive in all schools, not just PG. And, until we start valuing prevention, we're going to continue to be reactive, which is really unfortunate. But I mean, the more people we have operating from a mindset like Mrs. Washington, it's so refreshing to hear you saying all of these things. I will say, in other schools, I see a wide variety of practices throughout our county. And I just love hearing teachers that have this mentality, because the more of you that there are, the quicker we can change the system, the quicker we can make an impact. So.
And thank you for your service, Dr. Reed. I know you would be here and do more if you could. And so I think that's our job. I just want to add this one thing. I think about when prayer was in school, probably when we were all little. And then I think about one person standing up and saying, I don't want it. And it went away. So then I think about when we're all placed, I believe people are placed where God calls you. Are we standing up and making our voice heard for the children that we are in charge of? If one person can move prayer out, how come a whole group can't get better practices in? And so that's the question that I often ask myself. Am I doing what I'm really called to do? Or am I just making it through? And I think that's the question we all have to ask ourselves. What are we willing to do for the job that we were given?
Very good points. Very good points. And so that's when I'm wondering, how do we make this a part of the fabric of Carmody Hills, part of the fabric of PGCPS, part of the fabric of schools across the country and across the world? How do we make sure that it's not just something that we say, we do, as in like it's something on the checklist?
Well, the great thing at Comedy Hills, our principal, Mrs. Terry, she believes in the work. I know for me, she has said, just send me a note when you need to be out. And in a classroom or in a space, she's opened that door. She is part of the restorative team. Ms. Cox is part of the restorative team. So admin is on board, but I think there's a bigger cry. And the bigger cry is maybe demanding a meeting with Monica Golson, our CEO, and having her direct us from that point. But I think there's strength in numbers. And I think at some point it is now time for us to get fit for battle. And fit for battle is meaning let's get aggressive, not the way the world sees it, but the way the Lord would have us to do. Let's go and meet with Monica Golson. Let's have a heart-to-heart conversation. Let's meet with our union reps because they're fighting for bonuses and those things, but we need to be fighting for the mental health of our young people. So I think that's...
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Dr.
I was going to build off of what you were saying, because I think like the only way to do that, we need to be advocating to have full-time positions in people that is their job to cultivate that space. You know, someone who can dedicate all of their time to looking at our practices, our policies, the way things happen within our school, the structure to make it a restorative space in the whole school building rather just in pockets. You know, and I see that a lot. You know, you have pockets of safe spaces and pockets of spaces that are a bit, you know, more punitive. And it's all based on everyone has their own mentality and approach to teaching and learning. And we want to, you know, we want to keep that. Everyone has their own individual way of, you know, of doing things, but we need a system-wide approach that's rooted in that restorative practices. And that's what someone who is working full-time to do that would be trained to make sure is happening. And that's what we don't have right now. So advocating for that is the first step.
I think Howard County has a good example of how they have a lot of schools that are totally restorative practices. And what they do is before coming to work there, they let you know, this is who we are, because it's not something you take off and put on. It's who you are on an everyday cycle. And what they do is they let people know this is who we are. And if this doesn't work for you, it's okay. We'll grant that transfer for you. Because like you said, everyone has their own mindset of how they want to do school. But if you cannot trust the leadership in the direction they're going, then this is not the spot for you. And it's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person, but we need to know, are you on board or not? And I think sometimes we really, you know, with adults, we really try to be light with them. But at some point, adults can fend for themselves, children can't. And so when we say that we're going to be restorative, this is who we are. This is what you sign up for. This is the expectation, have people sign. Because when you can no longer meet that expectation, then this is no longer the space for you. And it's okay, but this is what we're trying to do at Comedy Hill. We are moving to restorative justice, restorative practice. We want to love on kids the same way we as adults want it. The same grace and mercy that we want extended to us, we have to extend it to our children.
And that accountability, yes. It's huge, the accountability, because if there's no, you know, if there's no one monitoring to make sure that we're actually upholding those ideas, then, you know, it all falls apart. So we really need that piece. And also you mentioned something important, I think, which is we need to model restorative practices within our interactions with the other adults in the building. So that's where it starts. It needs to be a full foundation, not just how we interact with students, but how we interact with everyone.
Ladies, this has been such an awesome, fruitful conversation. I feel like a bobblehead over here. I'm just like, I don't have any more specific questions for you, but I do want to offer both of you the opportunity if there's anything else that you would like to add on the topic before we go. The floor is yours.
I think if I would add anything, I believe all things are possible. Just the same way I look at kids, that who they are today is not who they'll be. I look at our school. Where we are today is not where we're always going to be. We are moving on and moving upward. And so moving upward is preparing our kids and planting seeds, not just for today, but for the rest of their life. And so I believe that better days are on the way. And I'm making my request known to the Lord that restorative justice is where it is, and to give me the strength to stand up for what is right, what is not just right, but righteous for the children.
And I love that. I don't have anything to add except for I want to collaborate with Mrs. Washington to see how I can help her in these pursuits in Carmody Hills. So I'll end with that.
Me too. And she knows that. Thank you, ladies, for being here and talking with me today about restorative practices at Carmody Hills and, throughout our communities. This was a great conversation. I really do appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work with both of you and to see, great things here at Carmody.